Hello, guys. I am Christopher Thomas, and I'm speaking for my group members, Aaron Giles, and we'll be joined by Jeremy Clark McKay. Our first hypothesis was that we thought that if the player died quickly, they would feel that the game was unfair. They would no longer be challenged. The relationship between survival time and enjoyment time was actually pretty normal. Our second hypothesis was that there would be a relationship between immersion and enjoyment. There was no relationship between immersion and enjoyment. That was our findings. And we also had a hypothesis of competitive players. Like the competitive players would not enjoy the game as much as those that are not, due to lack of a method to measure scores or play against others. So there was no score to beat. There was no other people playing. And we saw a negative relationship between the competitiveness and the enjoyment. Our methodology. So there were 6 tests conducted. We did a pre-test for the game, so we did a pre-test questionnaire. We also did a post-test questionnaire and a play test when we observed. For it being familiar to them, we looked for the gameplay and narrative preferences. We also looked for the gameplay and the narrative preference, basically to see what type of games they like to play. We asked questions to see if they were competitive or what their level of competitiveness was. And that was for the pre-test. And then for the play test, we just recorded their survival times. Our post-test questionnaire. So we had a score for enjoyment. And we also had the replayability, the recommendation factor, and the challenge. So basically, we wanted to see if they would recommend the game to someone else. We wanted to see if they wanted to play the game again, and if they actually enjoyed the game itself, and then if they also felt challenged while they played the game. This is our methodology questionnaire examples. So as you'll see, we have those elements that we were talking about as far as them ever playing a shoot 'em up game before, if they like narrative or gameplay games. We also had where we asked them if they wanted like a pre-play. So if they had basically a tutorial to tell them how to play, would they want to do that? Would they want to partake in that? Or they just want to get right into the game? We also asked them how competitive they were. And then after which, when they played the game, wanted to see if they enjoyed it, wanted to see if they would play it again, recommend it to a friend, if they feel like they were immersed, and challenged. And this is our research, unprocessed, from all of those playtests. So as you can see, the numbers for our first 2 hypotheses were pretty close. Our third was right there as well. And then once we did the second round, it was more spread out. We had other players who weren't as close as they were the first time we did the experiment. So our research data averages our pre-test results. So we had an average of 2.6 when it came to them being familiar. Competitiveness was pretty high, but it kind of averaged at a 4. Post-test results, the enjoyment is about a 3.8. The challenge, which was really low, no one felt like they was challenged. Kind of felt like they were kind of skating through a basic game. And the immersion is the 1.6. So it's pretty low because their challenges wasn't high, which made them not want to be engaged in the game, which makes them not want to actually stay immersed in the game. And now we'll take it over to Jeremy.
So, getting into our observations of the data we collected, the averages are mostly just to get a feel for our test population and what, the general trends among them in case there were anything, super strong one way or the other. We noticed we had a lot of competitive players, for instance, but we weren't expecting so much enjoyment of the game, actually. The average of the players seemed to be pretty engaged in it, give pretty high enjoyment scores. They seemed really attentive and focused while playing the game, didn't get bored or distracted easily under observation. So that was pretty good. Gave us a lot of good feedback on the fill-in-the-blank section on the post-test questionnaire. And as we expected, though there seems to be a little bit of challenge, it's just mostly at the beginning when people are getting used to the controls, like holding down mouse to repeatedly fire, the forward and back movement versus just the lateral, which a lot of modern shmups kind of go away with. and the challenge seemed to disappear pretty quickly once people got the hang of the controls. Like we expected, most of the players didn't really get immersed in the narrative of the game, or they didn't report it. So that's the basics of the test population. Getting into how we organize the data as it refers to our hypotheses. For the purposes of this presentation, we just kept them in basic scatter plots. It's still pretty easy to see trends that do or do not exist in the data. And we had some doubled results. So for instance, on the top left graph for enjoyment level versus competitiveness level, you can see on 4 enjoyment and 5 competitiveness, there's a bolded circle. That means we had a doubled result there. So 2 participants responded with exactly the same answers on those 2 questions on their questionnaires. So getting into the specific hypotheses. For hypothesis 1, we posited that there would be a normal distribution between enjoyment level and survival time. Players on the lower end would die too quickly, not feel it's fair, wouldn't enjoy it much. Players on the higher end would feel like it was too easy, they would get bored. So there would be a sweet spot in the middle. While there does seem to be a little bit of fluctuation in the data to the left of the middle, overall it does still show a pretty solid pattern of a normal distribution that I think would be evened out by more data collected. So this one could use a little bit more research, but it seems like there is some backing to our hypothesis. For hypothesis 2, we suspected that there wouldn't really be any relationship between enjoyment level and immersion level. And with so many identical results and things kind of all over the board from there, or just kind of concentrated in a line, there's not really a strong positive or negative correlation. So this seems to be, once again, a hypothesis proven correct. This one doesn't really need more data, in my opinion, just from how random the sample is, even at this size. For hypothesis 3, though, we expected that more competitive players wouldn't enjoy the game as much because they don't have an easy way to compare their scores with other players. But from the data we collected, there's actually a pretty positive correlation, a pretty strong positive correlation, even, between enjoyment level and competitiveness level. So this seems to go beyond rejecting the null hypothesis and even towards adopting an opposite hypothesis, which is pretty interesting. Overall, though, I think that 2 hypotheses out of 3 getting some backing is pretty good, and 2 hypotheses needing more data behind them but not the same 2, also pretty good. Considering the sample size we had for this experiment, it seemed to turn out pretty well.